The knock came soft but urgent, Claire in a towel, water pooling at her feet. Can you help me right now? She clutched the terry cloth tighter. The basement's flooding. Hello, I'm Daniel. I'm 25, restore furniture in a workshop that smells like sawdust and linseed oil. Not glamorous work, but there's something honest about bringing dead things back to life. I've been dating Sarah for 8 months, though lately we feel more like polite roommates than lovers. That night at her family's, Lake House changed everything. Sarah had left for the city that morning emergency presentation, she'd said, kissing my cheek like punctuation. Her mother Claire and I circled each other all day, careful and courteous, until the water heater broke. She stood dripping in my doorway at midnight, needing help. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I hadn't expected to feel like such an intruder on my first night here. Sarah had painted the lake house as her childhood paradise, endless summers of water skiing and campfires, the kind of memories that make you ache with nostalgia even while you're living them. But lying here in this unfamiliar guest room, surrounded by other people's photographs and the musty scent of rarely opened drawers, sleep felt impossible. Sarah dozed beside me, her breathing steady and unbothered. Of course, she could sleep. Every corner of this house held a piece of her story. For me, though, each creak and settling sound only emphasized how out of place I was. 2 weeks suddenly felt like an eternity. I shifted carefully, trying not to disturb Sarah as I checked my phone. 2 a.m. The moonlight streaming through the gauzy curtains cast strange shadows on the wall, and I found myself counting the leaves of a potted plant, desperate for any distraction that might lull me to sleep. That's why I heard it, soft footsteps in the hallway, barely audible, but distinct in the night stillness. They passed our door, followed by the gentle click of the deck door sliding open and closed. I shouldn't have gotten up, shouldn't have moved to the window. But something about those footsteps seemed to carry a weight that pulled me from the bed. I told myself I was just checking the sound source, making sure everything was okay in this unfamiliar house. Through the window, I saw Claire standing at the deck railing. The sight stopped me cold. Gone was the polished woman who'd greeted us earlier with measured warmth and perfect posture. Her hair, twisted up so precisely when she'd shown me to this room, now fell in auburn waves past her shoulders, catching silver in the moonlight. She wore what looked like a silk robe, its pale fabric moving slightly in the night breeze. But it was her face that held me there, frozen behind the curtain. Tears tracked down her cheeks, visible even in the dim light. She lifted a wine glass to her lips with one elegant hand, the other wrapped tightly around herself as if holding something in, or keeping something out. I'd never seen anyone look so completely alone. Something in my chest tightened. Earlier, she'd been all careful smiles and practiced hospitality, asking about my work while setting out fresh towels, maintaining that precise distance between host and guest. Now, in what she thought was solitude, every line of her body spoke of grief or loneliness, some private pain she only allowed herself to feel in these dark hours. I recognized it. Not the specifics, maybe, but that restless ache that drives you from your bed at 2 a.m. That makes you seek out darkness and silence because they're easier to face than your own thoughts. I had enough of those nights myself lately, though I couldn't have said exactly why. A cloud passed over the moon, dimming the scene before me. I stepped back from the window, suddenly aware of how intrusive it was to witness this private moment. The floorboard creaked under my foot, and I froze, heart pounding. But the sound of quiet sniffling from the deck continued uninterrupted. Back in bed, I lay still beside Sarah's sleeping form, haunted by the image of Claire's unguarded face in the moonlight. The contrast between her daytime composure and this raw vulnerability stirred something uncomfortable in my chest. Empathy, maybe, or recognition. Whatever drove her to seek solace in the night air seemed to echo my own sleeplessness, my own sense of being adrift in this house, full of memories that didn't belong to me. Sleep felt even more distant now. I stared at the ceiling, listening for the sound of footsteps returning down the hall. wondering what stories these walls held that could bring such tears to a woman who seemed so carefully put together. It was a long time before I heard the deck doors slide shut again, before those soft steps made their way back past our door dot in the morning. I knew Claire would appear at breakfast with her hair neatly twisted up, wearing that same measured smile. We'd all pretend this night never happened, but I wouldn't be able to forget the sight of her standing alone in the moonlight, or shake the feeling that I'd glimpse something true beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect lakeside retreat. Morning. Light filtered through the kitchen windows, turning everything golden and peaceful, a sharp contrast to the restless night before. I sat at the breakfast table, hyper-aware of Claire moving efficiently through her morning routine. Her hair was twisted up again, not a strand out of place. If I hadn't witnessed her midnight vigil, I would never have guessed at any crack in her composed exterior. The client just doesn't understand basic marketing principles, Sarah was saying, waving her fork for emphasis. I mean, they hired us for our expertise, right? But every suggestion gets pushed back to their original concept, which is, Mom, are you listening? Claire set a plate of perfectly arranged fruit beside the pancakes. Of course, dear. Your clients are being difficult. Her voice carried that particular patience mothers seem to master. But I caught something else there, too, a slight tension. Around her eyes. That's not what I... Sarah's phone buzzed, cutting her off. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Sorry, I need to take this. It's Kenny from the office. As Sarah stepped out onto the deck, phone pressed to her ear. I found myself alone with Claire for the first time. She poured coffee into a delicate cup, her movements precise and controlled. When she looked up, her eyes met mine with quiet assessment, as if trying to read something there. I dropped my gaze to my plate, suddenly fascinated by the geometric pattern of banana slices. Did you sleep well? She asked, her tone casual but careful. I hesitated, wondering if she knew about my nighttime observation. The room is very comfortable, thank you. Sarah burst back through the door before Claire could respond. There's an emergency with the Riverside account. Kenny says if we don't handle it immediately, we could lose the whole contract. She was already gathering her things, breakfast forgotten. I have to go back to the city. Today, now. Sarah, slow down, Claire said, setting down her coffee cup. I can drive you to the station if no time for that, Mom. I need my car anyway for client meetings. Sarah was typing rapidly on her phone. It'll be 3 days, maybe 4. Daniel can stay here, right? The renovation won't be done yet anyway. I stood, caught off guard by the sudden shift. Sarah, I can come with you. Find a hotel, or don't be silly. That's completely impractical. She finally looked up from her phone, but her mind was clearly already at the office. Mom has plenty of space, and you can get some writing done without city distractions. It's perfect. Claire and I exchanged a quick glance, the first moment of genuine connection since I'd arrived, both recognizing the awkwardness of the situation, but unable to voice it. Of course Daniel can stay, Claire said softly. The house is already prepared for guests. Sarah was barely listening, already heading for the stairs. Great, I'll grab my overnight bag. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of Sarah's efficient packing and distracted instructions about where I could find extra towels. Information Claire and I both knew she'd already covered yesterday. When it came time for goodbye, Sarah kissed me quickly, her mind clearly on the crisis awaiting her in the city. I'll call tonight, she promised, car keys jingling in her hand. Love you. And then she was gone, her car kicking up small puffs of dust as it disappeared down the tree-lined driveway. I stood in the gravel, feeling oddly untethered, aware that I was now effectively stranded at the lake house with a woman I barely knew, a woman whose private grief I'd witnessed just hours ago. I turned back toward the house and found Claire watching from the doorway. Something crossed her face, an emotion I couldn't quite rid, before her features settled back into their usual, careful arrangement. She stepped aside to let me enter, then closed the door with deliberate softness. We should probably establish some ground rules, she said, her voice steady but gentle, for sharing the space. I nodded, hyper aware of how the morning sun caught the auburn highlights in her hair. How different she looked in this warm light compared to the silvery moonlight of last night. That seemed sensible. The day stretched out like taffy, sweet but strangely tense. Claire and I developed an unspoken choreography, carefully avoiding direct encounters while maintaining a veneer of casual politeness. I claimed the deck chair. With a book I'd barely read, sneaking glances as she tended to her garden beds. Her movements were precise and purposeful, each weed extracted with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything else. The dot around noon, we crossed paths in the kitchen. She'd assembled sandwiches, turkey and Swiss on sourdough, cut into neat triangles, and set them on 2 plates without asking if I was hungry. We ate in companionable silence at opposite ends of the table, the tick of the old wall clock marking time between tearful bites. The garden looks nice, I offered, immediately wishing I'd found something more substantial to say. Thank you. She smiled briefly, then returned to her sandwich. The afternoon slipped away in similar fashion, each of us orbiting the other at a careful distance. As evening approached, I was back in my borrowed room, pretending to write while actually watching. The sunset paint the lake in watercolor shades of pink and gold. That's when I heard a suspicious gurgling sound from somewhere below, followed by a distinct splash. I set my laptop aside and went to investigate. The basement door opened. Onto darkness, but even from the top of the stairs, I could hear water running where it shouldn't be. I fumbled for the light switch and made my way down. The utility room was already ankle-deep in water, more gushing from somewhere near the ancient water heater. I had just stepped closer to assess the damage when urgent knocking echoed from upstairs. Daniel? Claire's voice carried a note of panic I hadn't heard before. Daniel, are you down there? Yes, I'm... She peered at the top of the stairs, and my words caught in my throat. She was wrapped in nothing but a towel, her hair dripping wet, leaving dark spots on her shoulders. Even in the dim light, I could see her cheeks were flushed from. The interruption of her shower or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. The water just stopped, she said, descending the stairs with careful steps. And then I heard flooding down here. I tried to focus on the practical emergency rather than her state of undress. The water heater's leaking. I need to find the shutoff. Valve. She moved closer, keeping one hand firmly on her towel while the other held up her phone's flashlight. It's behind the unit. You'll have to reach around. The utility room suddenly felt very small with both of us in it. I could smell her shower-fresh skin, something floral and clean that made it hard to concentrate. Water continued pooling around our feet as I squeezed behind the water heater, trying not to brush against her as I passed. Can you angle the light lower? I asked, my voice rougher than intended. She stepped closer, phone extended. The beam illuminated the maze of pipes and valves, but also cast interesting shadows across her collarbone. I forced my attention back to the task at hand, reaching for what I hoped was the main shutoff. The valve was stubborn, resistant after years of disuse. I had to brace one foot against the wall for leverage, painfully aware of Claire standing just inches away, of water soaking through my clothes, of her quiet breathing in the confined space. Finally, the valve gave way with a protesting groan. The flooding slowed, then stopped entirely. In the sudden quiet, I became hyper-aware of our breathing, slightly elevated from the shared tension of the moment. Thank you, Claire said softly. Her hand found my shoulder in the dim light, squeezing gently. The touch, though brief, sent an unexpected current through me. I could feel the warmth of her fingers even through my wet shirt. She stepped back, first adjusting her towel. We should both change into dry clothes. Her voice had returned to its usual controlled tone, but something lingered in it, a slight tremor, perhaps. Would you like some tea afterward? To warm up? I nodded, not trusting my voice entirely. The basement felt colder now without her standing quite so close. Give me 10 minutes, she said, already heading for the stairs. I'll put the kettle on. 10 minutes later, I found myself sitting across from Claire at the kitchen table. Both of us changed into dry clothes and warming our hands around steaming mugs of chamomile tea. She'd pulled her damp hair back into a loose braid, and the kitchen's Soft lighting softened the lingering tension in her shoulders. The quiet felt different now, less careful, more contemplative. I should apologize, she said, breaking the silence. That wasn't exactly how I planned to end my evening shower. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. No apology needed, I assured her, taking a sip of tea. Though I have to admit, I didn't expect to be wrestling with plumbing on my first full day here. Claire's fingers traced the rim of her mug. That water heater's been temperamental for years. Tom, my ex-husband, he used to handle all the house repairs. She paused, something distant crossing her expression. When he left 5 years ago, I had to learn everything from scratch. YouTube tutorials became my best friend. The admission carried weight, and I found myself leaning forward slightly. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't. She met my eyes briefly. But there's something empowering about figuring things out on your own. Even if sometimes, she glanced toward the basement door. Sometimes it's nice to have help. I understand that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. After my parents divorced, I watched my mom tackle all these household tasks she'd never done before. I promised myself I'd learn to be self-sufficient, but I shook my head, chuckling softly. Last month, I flooded my kitchen trying to install a dishwasher. Her laugh was unexpected and warm. Please tell me you didn't. Complete disaster. Had to replace the flooring and everything. That's partly why I'm staying here. My apartment's still being renovated. At least you tried, she said, her expression softening. Most people would have just called a professional, like you've done with all your repair projects. I raised an eyebrow, and she had the grace to look sheepish. Fair point. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Actually, I have quite a list of things I've been putting off. The deck railing needs reinforcing. There's a stubborn leak under. The kitchen sink. She paused, then added with careful casualness. I don't suppose you'd be interested in helping with a few while Sarah's away? I make an excellent assistant, and I know my mother's secret coffee recipe. The offer hung in the air between us, feeling somehow bigger than simple house repairs. That depends, I said, matching her light tone. How secret is this coffee recipe? Very. Her eyes crinkled at the corners. She used to say it could solve any problem, heal any heartache. I've never shared it with anyone else. Something warm settled in my chest that had nothing to do with the tea. In that case, how could I refuse? Claire stood, gathering our empty mugs. The kitchen clock showed it was nearly midnight. I should head to bed. Early morning swim tomorrow, another habit I picked up after the divorce. She moved to the doorway but paused, one hand resting on the frame. When she turned back, her expression was unguarded in a way that reminded me of that first night, watching her on the deck. Daniel? Her voice was soft. Thank you for tonight. Not just the water heater, but she seemed to search for the right words. It reminded me what it feels like to not handle everything alone. Before I could respond, she was gone, her footsteps fading up the stairs. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the old house settle around me, thinking about secret coffee, recipes, and the unexpected comfort of shared vulnerability. Morning light painted the deck in warm stripes as Claire handed me a steaming mug of coffee. True to her word, this wasn't just any brew. The rich aroma carried hints of something I couldn't quite place. Mysterious and comforting at once. We'd fallen into this routine over the past 2 days, sharing dawn together before Sarah's scheduled check-in calls. So, Claire settled into the Adirondack chair beside me. Tell me you've read Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie. I grinned, remembering the dog-eared copy in my backpack. It's actually one of my favorites. Sarah tried reading it once, but said it was too slow. Tom said the same thing. Claire shook her head, taking a slow sip of coffee. You preferred business magazines? Sometimes I wonder if I spent too many years pretending to care about quarterly reports when I could have been discussing Steinbeck. The morning passed like that, trading book recommendations and film opinions. Discovering shared appreciation for authors Sarah dismissed as too artsy. Claire's eyes lit up when I mentioned foreign films, and soon we were deep in discussion about Italian neorealism. After lunch, I found myself perched on a ladder, cleaning leaves from rain gutters while Claire steadied the bass. Sarah used to hide her art projects up here, she called up to me. Once, I found an entire semester's worth of finger paintings she was too embarrassed to show us. I can't picture Sarah finger painting, I admitted, passing down another handful of wet leaves. She was different then. More free. Claire's voice carried a hint of something wistful. Before she decided everything had to serve her 5-year plan, working together felt natural. Claire knew every creak and quirk of the house, sharing its history as we fixed loose boards and tightened wobbly railings. This deck, she told me while I reinforced a section of railing, is where I used to set up my tripod for sunrise shots. I had this whole series planned lake light, I was going to call it. I paused, hammer mid-swing. You're a photographer? Was. She handed me another nail, her fingers brushing mine briefly. I was halfway through my MFA when Tom's law career took off. Someone had to be there for Sarah, and she shrugged, but I could see the old pain surface. It made sense at the time. Later that evening, we found ourselves back on the deck, the lake a mirror for countless stars. The air had grown cooler, and Claire had brought out an old quilt she draped across both our laps as we sat side by side. Can I tell you something I haven't said out loud before? I asked, watching ripples spread across the dark water. Of course. I don't think Sarah and I want the same life anymore. Maybe we never did. The words felt both heavy and freeing. She's all about climbing corporate ladders, networking events, city apartments. And I gestured vaguely at the peaceful lake. Seen before us. You want something quieter, Claire finished softly. Yeah, something more authentic. I want to write, maybe teach. Sarah calls those hobby careers. Claire was quiet for a long moment. I understand more than you know, she finally said. I have a whole dark room in the basement I haven't touched in 20 years. Sometimes I wonder who I might have become. If I'd chosen differently, it's never too late, I offered. Surprising myself with how much I wanted it to be true for both of us. She turned to face me, moonlight catching the auburn strands in her hair. That's a dangerous thought. We stayed, talking until well past midnight, sharing hopes and regrets we'd never voiced to anyone else. Claire told me about her first photography show, eyes bright with remembered passion. I confessed my secret dream of writing a novel. The conversations felt like finding pieces of ourselves we'd tucked away, forgotten, but not lost. When the night air finally drove us inside, we lingered in the kitchen doorway, reluctant to break the spell of understanding that had settled between us. Thank you, Claire said softly, for listening. It's been a very long time since I've talked about my photography with anyone. Thank you for trusting me with it, I replied, meaning far more than just her artistic past. We both knew we should head to bed. Sarah would call early tomorrow, but neither of us moved. The quiet kitchen holding us in a moment that felt both completely natural and utterly impossible. The storm rolled in just as Claire was clearing our dinner plates. First came the distant rumble, then sharp cracks of thunder that rattled the windows. I was helping dry dishes when the kitchen lights flickered once, twice, and died. Well, Claire's voice came from the darkness. I suppose that was inevitable. A flash of lightning illuminated her silhouette as she moved to a drawer, retrieving flashlights and candles. The breaker box is in the basement, but with this weather, she shook her head. Best to wait it out. Living room, I suggested. At least there's a fireplace. We gathered our light sources and made our way through the shadowed house. Rain drummed against the windows with increasing intensity, and occasional lightning transformed the lake into brief daylight. Claire knelt at the fireplace, arranging kindling with practiced hands. I used to love storms like this, she said, striking a match. Before the divorce, they felt cozy. Now they just remind me how empty the house is. The kindling caught, casting warm light across her features. Not empty tonight, I offered quietly. She glanced up, a small smile touching her lips. No, I suppose not. Once the fire was going properly, Claire stood and brushed off her hands. Wait here, she said, disappearing into the darkness. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, then silence broken only by rain and crackling flames. Then She returned. She carried a large black portfolio case I hadn't seen before. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, she said, settling beside me on the floor near the fire. About paths not taken. She opened the case carefully, almost reverently. These are from my MF at work. I haven't shown them to anyone. In, well, a very long time. The first photograph she withdrew stopped my breath. Black and white, it showed an elderly woman's hands kneading bread dough, every line and wrinkle captured with extraordinary clarity. But it was more than just technical skill. There was something in the composition that made those weathered hands look both powerful and vulnerable. That was Mrs. Rodriguez, Claire said softly. She ran the bakery near my first apartment. 4. M every morning, mixing dough by feel because she'd memorized every recipe. She turned to the next image. A young couple on a fire escape, the woman laughing while the men looked at her with such naked adoration it almost hurt to witness. They didn't know I was there, Claire explained. I was practicing street photography. They were so lost in their own world. One by one, she revealed more photographs. A child's abandoned tricycle in fresh snow. A man in a worn suit sleeping on a subway car, his briefcase clutched protectively. An artist's studio scattered with half-finished sculptures. Dust motes dancing in diagonal light. Each image seemed to capture some essential truth about its subject. Claire had an uncanny ability to find beauty in imperfect moments, the in-between. Spaces most people overlooked. These are extraordinary, I said, meaning it. The way you see people, I was always drawn to transitions, she replied. Moments when people are becoming something else, or letting go of what they were. Lightning flashed outside, and in that instant, I saw something vulnerable cross her face. Maybe that's why I stopped. I was afraid to document my own transitions. She leaned forward to turn another page in the portfolio, and her damp hair still. Shower wet from before dinner brushed against my cheek. We both went still. The contact was featherlight, accidental, but in that moment, I became acutely aware of how close we were sitting, how the firelight played across her skin, how the storm had created a pocket of intimacy that felt separate. From the rest of the world, neither of us moved. I could hear her breathing, slightly uneven. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks, and Claire drew back slowly, tucking her hair behind her ear with a hand that trembled slightly. I should check the weather report, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. On my phone. But she didn't move to get up, and I didn't look away from her face. And the storm raged on around our quiet bubble of candlelight and unspoken things. The silence stretched between us, thick with possibility. Claire remained close, her hair still damp where it had brushed my cheek, her portfolio forgotten between us. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across her face as she studied me with an intensity that made my heart race. This is dangerous, isn't it? She whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. I could only nod, knowing any words would break whatever fragile thing was suspended in this moment. The truth of it hung heavy in the air, this feeling that had been building since that first night I saw her crying on the deck. Claire didn't move away entirely, but she straightened slightly, creating just enough distance to think clearly. We need to talk about this, she said softly. Really talk about it, not hide from it or pretend it isn't happening. Okay, I managed. My throat dry. Because I feel it too, she continued, her fingers brushing against my hand where it rested on the portfolio. The touch sent electricity through me, but she withdrew. Just as quickly. This connection. This pull. And that's why we need to name it, examine it, decide what we're going to do about it. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the tears gathering in her eyes. Sarah trusts us both, and you're here because of her. I know. The weight of that truth settled heavily between us. We talked through the dark hours with a kind of raw honesty I'd never experienced before. Claire would occasionally reach out to touch my hand when making an important point, each contact deliberate now, charged with meaning. But she always pulled back as if reminding herself of the boundaries we were discussing. The timing is wrong, she said at one point, firelight catching the amber highlights in her eyes. Even if everything else wasn't complicated, I'm still trying to figure out who I am after the divorce. And you're questioning your relationship? With Sarah, which makes this feel even more. I searched for the right word. Tempting, she finished. Because we both understand that uncertainty, that longing for something different. She ran a hand through her hair, now mostly dry and falling in waves around her face. But that's exactly why we need to be careful. We could both be reaching for something that feels like an escape. The storm gradually settled into gentle rain. As we talked through every aspect of our situation, the attraction we couldn't deny, the timing that couldn't be worse, the web of relationships that could be destroyed. Claire spoke about choices and consequences with the wisdom of someone who had learned. Hard lessons about rushing into decisions of the heart, as the first hint of pre-dawn light began to seep through the windows. Claire's voice grew softer, more resigned. Sometimes the right choice is the one that hurts, she said, absently tracing patterns on the carpet between us. Integrity matters more than desire, even when desire feels like drowning. I nodded, though everything in me wanted to argue, too. Find some way around the careful wall of ethics we'd constructed through the night. But she was right. We both knew she was right. Claire shifted closer then, moving with deliberate grace. My breath caught as she leaned in, but she only pressed her lips to my forehead. A benediction, an acknowledgement of everything we were choosing not to pursue. The kiss lasted just long enough to memorize. The softness of her lips, the scent. Of her hair, the gentle pressure that spoke of care and regret in equal measure. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. But instead of moving away entirely, she hesitated. Would you? She started, then seemed to gather her courage. Would you like to watch the sunrise from my balcony? The question held more weight than its simple words suggested. Her eyes searched mine, asking things neither of us had dared put into words through our long night of careful honesty. I held her gaze, my heart thundering in my chest, knowing this question was both an ending and a beginning, though of what? I wasn't yet sure. The balcony faced east, giving us a perfect view of dawn breaking over the lake. We sat in matching Adirondack chairs, close enough that I could feel the warmth from Claire's body, though we weren't touching. The morning air held that special stillness unique to the hours before sunrise. When the world seems to pause and hold its breath, neither of us spoke as the first. Rays of sunlight painted the water in shades of gold and rose. I wanted to capture this moment, to memorize every detail, the way Claire's profile softened in the growing light, how her hands rested loosely in her lap, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. After our night of difficult honesty, this silence felt like a gift. Delicate and precious the sun crested the tree line, setting the lake's surface ablaze with color. A family of ducks cut across the water, leaving rippling trails in their wake. I found myself holding my breath, afraid the slightest movement might shatter this perfect stillness between us. The harsh electronic trill of Claire's phone made us both jump. She pulled it from her robe pocket, glancing at the screen. Something flickered across her face, resignation, perhaps, or guilt, before she answered. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady and maternal. A pause. Yes, everything's fine here. Her eyes met mine briefly before darting away. He's right here, actually. Would you like to speak with him? Claire held out the phone, and I took it, our fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact sent a jolt through me that had nothing to do with static electricity. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "Daniel." Sarah's voice came through tinny and distant. "God, I miss you." This project is absolute chaos. She launched into a detailed explanation of client demands and office politics, barely pausing for breath. The Sarah I knew from the lake house, the one who shared childhood stories and laughed easily, seemed very far away. "Which means I might need to stay another week," she was saying. "Maybe longer. This could be huge for my career, Daniel. If we land this account, how much longer?" I asked, watching as Claire moved to stand at the balcony railing, her hands gripping the wood tightly. "I don't know, 2 weeks? 3? However long it takes." Sarah's voice held that familiar edge of impatience, the one that appeared whenever I questioned her work commitments. You understand, right? This could define my whole career trajectory. Right, I said softly. Of course. After a few more minutes of one-sided conversation, we said goodbye. I stood there holding Claire's phone, feeling the weight of everything. Unsaid between Sarah and me, everything that had been wrong for months before we ever came to this lake house. I moved to join Claire at the railing, maintaining a careful few inches of space between us. We both stared out at the water, now fully illuminated by morning sun. A loon called somewhere in the distance, its cry haunting and lonely. She's staying in the city, I said finally. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Claire's grip on the railing tightened, her knuckles whitening. Daniel, I'm going to end things with Sarah. The words came out before I could second-guess them, quiet but firm. Not because of this, whatever this is between us. I gestured vaguely at the space between our bodies. But because it's been ending for months and we both know it, we want different lives, different futures. She needs someone who shares her ambitions, who gets excited about corporate success and city living. And I trailed off, unable to finish the thought with Claire standing so close, the morning light catching in her auburn hair. She turned to look at me then, really look at me, her hazel eyes searching my face. What do you need? She asked softly, though I wasn't sure she wanted me to answer, before I could respond. A boat's motor rumbled to life somewhere on the lake, breaking the morning quiet. Claire stepped back from the railing, crossing her arms across her chest as if suddenly cold despite the warming air. Claire turned to face me, her expression intent and searching. I held still under scrutiny, letting her look for whatever she needed to find. The morning light caught the amber flecks in her hazel eyes as she studied me, probably checking for signs of impulsive decision-making or dishonesty. She must have found neither, because her shoulders relaxed slightly. Would you, she started, then paused to choose her words carefully. Would you consider staying one more night? Not as Sarah's boyfriend, but as yourself. Just to see what that feels. Like, the question hung between us, weighted with possibility. Yes, I said simply, because anything more would have complicated what was already complex enough. The entire day shifted after that conversation, taking on a different quality. We moved through the house with new awareness, no longer carefully, avoiding each other's space, but not quite touching either. Every time we passed in the hallway or shared a room, I felt the intentionality of our movements, the conscious choice to be present rather than distant. When evening came, we gravitated to the kitchen without discussion. Claire pulled ingredients from the refrigerator while I gathered pots and pans, falling into an unplanned choreography as we prepared dinner together. The kitchen wasn't large, forcing us to navigate around each other constantly. Each time our fingers brushed reaching for the same utensil or Claire slipped behind me to reach the spice rack. The contact felt deliberate, electric with unspoken possibility. Over plates of pasta at the small kitchen table, we talked about the practical reality of our situation, the necessary conversations that would need to happen, the careful timing everything would require, the patience it would take if we decided to explore whatever was growing between us. I won't be anyone's rebound, Claire said firmly, twirling pasta around her fork, or transition between relationships. I've spent too many years being someone's second choice. I understand, I assured her, meaning it completely. Whatever happens next needs to happen slowly, correctly, with respect, for everyone involved, including ourselves. She nodded, and I watched some tension leave her shoulders. It won't be simple, she said. No, I agreed. But simple isn't always better. We continued eating, letting the conversation drift to lighter topics, but there was new understanding between us. Every shared smile and lingering glance acknowledged the potential we'd finally voiced aloud. Even as we agreed to give it time to breathe, after the dishes were done, Claire led me down to the weathered dock. We sat side by side, letting our feet dangle in the perfectly warm water. The lake stretched before us, mirror still in the fading light, How will you tell her? Claire asked softly. Honestly, directly, in person, I said. She deserves that much. Claire nodded, trailing her fingers through the water. And after? Time. Space. However long it takes to do this, right? I'm 47, she said, voicing the unspoken concern. People will talk. They'll assume things. Let them, I said, though I understood her fear. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. Listen to us, making careful plans for something that might never happen. When the moon began to rise, Claire stood and offered her hand. I took it, following her back toward the house where lamplight spilled onto the lawn. At the foot of the stairs, she turned to face me, a question in her eyes. I stepped closer, answering without words, both of us understanding this was about choosing our beginning. In the hushed darkness of the hallway, Claire's fingertips found my cheek, her touch both question and answer. When I drew her closer, our first kiss held all the care of opening something precious, then deepened as pretense fell away. Between soft breaths, she whispered, Are you sure? And I nodded, never more certain. At her bedroom door, she paused, giving me one final moment to choose. I stepped through with her, into moonlight filtering through gauzy curtains. We took our time, words and touches building something real, even as barriers crumbled. As dawn approached. We lay tangled in sheets, Claire's fingers tracing idle patterns. On my chest while she spoke of patience, of future worth waiting for. The sky outside turned pearl gray, but we stayed, choosing each other in the quiet light of morning. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the aromatic promise of coffee drifting up from below. Claire's movements in the kitchen created a gentle morning symphony. When I found her, she wore paint-stained clothes that somehow looked perfect, her camera resting on the counter beside her. No hint of regret shadowed her face, if anything. She seemed more certain than ever. Under my waiting coffee mug, I discovered her note. Stay for breakfast. I want to take your portrait in the morning light. Looking up, I caught her watching me with a small smile that acknowledged everything between us had shifted into something new and real. Over eggs and toast, we mapped out the necessary steps ahead. My return to the city today, the conversation I needed to have with Sarah, the patience we'd both need while things settled. Claire insisted on driving me to the station herself. During the quiet drive, she took my hand once, squeezed it gently before letting go. At the platform, her kiss landed softly on my cheek as she whispered, Take your time, I'll be here. I watched her drive away, her number newly saved in my phone, understanding the months of waiting ahead were just another part of doing this right. If this story found you at the right time. Subscribe and set reminders. Tomorrow's might be the nudge, the hug, or the promise you've been waiting for.